Okay, so Nick, thank you. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Seth Kane. All those acronyms after my name, I won't explain each one of them, but I am going to explain all of them in one. They're all part of actually a brand new organization, roughly about 2 years old, called the International Association for Accessibility Professionals.
Yep.
So if you haven't heard about it, I highly recommend checking it out. They have a couple of levels of certifications to help you in your endeavors of accessibility. But we're about to talk about to boldly go where no spa has gone before. So I'm gonna I want to know who's in the audience. I can't obviously see who is online, but developers, would you mind raising your hands? Okay, good portion. UX, ooh, even more, love it. Okay, QA, okay, and anybody else, just so I see. Okay, perfect. So you're all in the right place because this conversation is going to be really geared towards developers and UX equally. It's not going to be an overwhelming amount of code or anything like that, but it is to be talking about single page applications and how accessibility works within them, so to speak, and things for you to take away and work as a team together. So let's get right into it. So before we go into the details of the presentation, it's really important for you all to know these things first. So, know your web development best practices, know WCAG, or WCAG as some people call it. Like, it's an absolute must. The WAI authoring practices, if you don't know what those are, you absolutely have to get a grasp on those. That will pave the way for most of what we'll be talking about. At least one popular screen reader. So like, for those of you in the room that don't know how to use a screen reader, you likely won't be able to be as successful as possible without knowing some basic uses of screen readers. And then never go into space alone. Bring UX with you because this is critical. I'm not going to go through all of the resources that I have, but here's a list. This deck will be distributed. It's also on live, so you'll be able to get a whole bunch of links about SPA and accessibility and all that. But this talk really is about the folks that have a little bit of knowledge of accessibility, a little bit of SPA, maybe a little bit more, but it's the blending of them together. So let's get right into it. So what is a SPA? And throughout the presentation, I have used some background images that are text alternatives. So you can kind of see what those are later on. This is a picture of a black hole. I'm not going to describe each one of them because I think there's a lot of information in this deck and it'll take me too long to explain everyone. So anyway, a single page application, or known as SPA, is a web application or website that interacts with the user by dynamically writing the content or the page through asynchronous calls. It's not server rendered. So that's a really important distinction. And a lot of you have probably experienced the SPA, but there are generally two types. So one is what's called a single load, where every resource, JavaScript, CSS, HTML, everything is preloaded into the browser. And the only thing that's coming in and out is data. So like JSON or some other sort of REST service. And then there is what's called a multi-page or a dynamic load SPA, which is based upon user interactions or routing or URLs. Materials will be loaded in dynamically. So you can actually do all sorts of different things and have a more performant site. So there's a couple of different ways to do it. If you're more interested in that type of stuff than the accessibility part, which I doubt you are, there's tons of information about SPAs. You can overload yourself with the internet. Here are a couple of examples. I will describe these that are all SPAs. So we have Pinterest in the big top left. If anybody's used Pinterest, it is a single page application. For the most part, this is a non-routing, dynamic loading SPA. Another example is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn uses, if I'm not mistaken, Ember. So we'll get into that in a little bit. And then I would guess for the most of you, you've used Gmail. Gmail is the quintessential SPA because everything is loaded dynamically. Like, you couldn't imagine loading all of your emails at once and stuff like that. So why do people or engineering or applications or companies choose SPA? So the one reason is speed. So once it's loaded, it's loaded. So if anybody ever works with like Akamai or any sort of CDN, once you load those resources, you can cache them. and you never need to do anything with them, and all you're doing is just loading new data, like loading, parameters or variables or content. Caching is what I just talked about. Resource management. So with a dynamic loading SPA, you can have, let's say, files that pertain only to the home page. And when you go to another page, you could load new files into the browser, and it only uses up the resources that you actually need to use for that particular experience. Why load the entire site if a user's on a certain path and they never go down another path? So that's one of the things. Responsive, so we generally associate responsive with CSS, but with SPA, you can actually do responsive content, and you can do responsive JavaScript, and you can do responsive HTML. It opens the whole world of different dynamic viewports and information for different devices and so forth. And then this is more of a theoretical practicality, is the seamless experience. For those of you that have been using the internet for a long time, or at least using it on a really slow internet connection, when you click on something and it goes blank and it goes to a new page, the idea is that a SPA is seamless. It gives you an opportunity to actually flow through it faster and not have that perceived loading. There are instances that it's not that way, but for the most part, those are the reasons why people choose SPA. Am I going too fast? Sweet. Okay, popular libraries. I'm going to go through a lot of this pretty quickly because I want to get to the good parts. So Angular, Backbone, Ember, Knockout, React, JS, Vue, and there's probably 15 other ones, and tomorrow there might be 15 more. I mean, basically, every cool company or person wants to use what's latest and greatest. And I've used Angular, Backbone, and Knockout and React for the most part. They all basically do the same thing. I'm not even remotely going to talk about anything related to each of them. This entire presentation is framework agnostic or library agnostic. So you basically just pick your framework, and you still can apply all of these principles and topics to whatever you choose. So the gravitational pull. So why are SPAs typically not accessible? This is the big question. Okay. Number one thing I've noticed is bad HTML and no keyboard events. So it's amazing to me how many developers, which are now generally called engineers, and most of those engineers are JavaScript engineers, don't even know how to write good HTML. They let the framework do all of the work, right? That's number one problem. If you don't have good HTML, you're likely not going to be accessible. I mean, like with any site, right? But a SPA just makes it even more difficult. Misuse or no ARIA. So ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Application. That's a sub-language of HTML. It's provided by the W3C for making your HTML markup communicate with screen readers. I don't know if anybody knows this or not, but ARIA really only works with screen readers and some voice recognition software. Every other assistive technology ignores ARIA. So it's really to communicate solely to the screen readers, or for the most part. Lack of focus management, so focus of like when you interact with something, where do you go next? So like we all know the blue highlight ring in Chrome, that's the focus indicator, right? Lack of communication, so what is happening? So ARIA is a big factor in that, but also what are you trying to communicate to the user in what's either happening right this second or what's going to happen next? And that's a big thing. And then big changes to the documents. So I've seen a lot of SPAs become SPAs because it's cool and rather than because it actually serves a purpose. So if you have full page changes, you are essentially doing a full page change. And that's a big problem if you're not using all these different techniques. So when you change the content in the document or the code in the document, that's a pretty big challenge. So here are some examples. Hopefully you can see this way in the back, but I'll articulate what it is. So the bad HTML is the first one I talked about, right? So don't forget the semantics. If it looks like a button, it acts like a button, why isn't it a button, right? Okay, you'll hear that all the time, right? Compliant HTML, if anybody doesn't know, the W3C validator, bookmark it, put it in your bookmarks bar, use it all the time, it's the best thing. So I have a picture here on the right of Angular's homepage, and what I'm pointing to is their H1 tag. That's not an H1 tag. It's a div that says hero headline. So while this is simple accessibility here, but all these SPA frameworks and all these things typically do things like this. They basically have code that does what it does. It's under the hood. You don't really know what the magic is behind it. But unless you're paying close attention to it, you're not going to actually know what it's going to do because you're relying on the framework or the library to do it. So this was a very easy example to find. But the buttons, links, ng tags with Angular, you can put an ng tag on anything and make it do whatever you want, but that doesn't mean that you should. Misuse or no ARIA. So since most spas use custom components, right, like they're not browser object components, you're basically writing them from scratch. So you really need to understand roles, states, and properties of what the W3C and WAI dictate to ensure that your custom single-page application is communicating to those screen readers and other assistive technologies. On the right here, I have a screenshot of an href that actually has a link, but it also has a role of a link. So this is kind of a funny conundrum, is you have a link, but you're redefining it with ARIA as a link. I mean, every screen reader knows it's already a link. So why are you using a role of a link? All you're doing is wasting code, you're making your spa slow, you're potentially confusing browsers, all sorts of different things. So really, misuse of ARIA is a critical thing, because if you actually use it incorrectly, you likely are making something inaccessible rather than accessible. Lack of focus management. So, based upon the user interaction, updates in the DOM will happen, right? So the document object model. And unless you are visually perceiving what's happening, there's no way for you to know unless unless the user experience and the developer tells you where to go next. So for instance, I have a picture of my Gmail. This is my spam, so you can soak it in as much as you want. Of an email that I'm about ready to delete, right? So it's highlighted blue, I'm using my keyboard, and then I go to the next one, and after deleting the message, this is a question for you also, class participation. After deleting the message, where is the most likely place the user's eye and or the mouse pointer will likely go? So this is standard user experience. I click the little delete icon, and what will likely I look for next? It's probably the next message, right? Because I read from left to right, top to bottom, right? And probably with some eye tracking software or some mouse tracking software, I might do that. That's a probability that will likely happen, right? So if I click or if I use my keyboard and delete that message, and I don't use focus management to go to that next message, how am I telling that user that can't perceive with their eyes where or what to do next? So we have to take focus management into consideration. This is a huge, huge thing. And this is probably, without being scientific about it, the majority of the problems with spas, both for keyboard and any other type of accessible needed user for their site. It's really important. The other thing is lack of communication. So more often than not, we use visual content and UI elements to communicate change. Like you plop in new content, you animate something, you highlight it, whatever, right? But if you can't see it happening, how are you telling the user, communicating, what's happening? So a classic example is loading screens. You push a submit button, it goes to a little spinner, right? You can see it, but you don't know what's happening. In traditional websites, so multi-page websites, you actually get a blank white screen, you actually get a status indicator in the bottom left-hand corner of the browser. You actually get, with a screen reader, it's announcing the percentage of page loading. You get all of these things inherently. But you do a spa, you lose all that. So if you aren't communicating what's actually happening on the screen, you likely are having a very confused user. So password strength. Who's done one of those password things and it says like, weak, medium, strong. I mean, passwords are hard enough to fill out to begin with, but if you don't know if you're meeting the criteria of the business, and that's not communicating to you verbally or visually or through assistive technology, there's no way that you're going to get it right. Countdown timers, in the business that I'm in right now, we use countdown timers a lot. Things like Ticketmaster uses countdown timers because there's time sensitive, and if you imagine sitting on the page waiting for 9 a.m. to get your, Beyonce concert tickets, right? I was talking about Beyonce outside earlier. Don't judge me. But anyway, And if you're sitting there and you don't know that you've got a minute left, or 59 seconds left, or 30 seconds left, or 1 minute until you can hit the add to cart button, you're likely going to miss out on that fabulous concert, right? So new posts, Twitter, LinkedIn, things like that are huge, right? You're seeing on a single page application and constantly it's sucking in or refreshing the content. And if you don't know about that, you're likely missing out on all the new fake news, right? I mean, so things like that. Live chats and updates, those are important. You need to clearly communicate all the time. This is a picture of Expedia. So if you ever wanted to test this in the real world, go to Expedia, go on their search page, use the sort feature or the filter feature, and likely you'll hear it saying like, oh, it's loading, and here's how many new results there are, and what order it's in, and all sorts of good stuff. I have the ARIA Live here highlighted. So I want to go back to that big changes to the documents, because this is one of the biggest things that I see with most places. And so most spas do not call a new document, right? So what I mean by that is if you're looking at the console or if you know anything about server technology, it's actually not printing out new HTML on the server side. So, and that's why the browser doesn't actually get that page reload, right? So we're just swapping out. If you look at the console and you see it flash, that's what single page application generally is doing. So if you look at the document part of the console, you'll never see a new one come in. So routes and page turns. So when you click on from, let's say, the home page to the About Us page, you might change the URL, but you're actually not calling new documents. Okay. So what do you do when that happens? When you're searching, let's say you're on a site and it drops down some fancy type ahead feature and you click it and you actually, Google does this, the page doesn't actually go away. It just brings in the results at the bottom. So how are you handling that, right? So filters and facets and sorting, search or sending and receiving new content. All of these are the big glaring ones that come into play with loading the documents. So here's how we kind of some basics on how to solve all of that. So think LinkedIn, Twitter, Pinterest. Some of them are good, some of them aren't. I'm not judging any of them, but here are the things that you want to do. So when you're changing the full page, right, in a spa, change the title tag, right? That's the thing someone's going to be likely looking for first, or they're going to be perceiving, or they might actually be hearing it. But the fact is that the screen reader doesn't actually get that information, right? So we need to figure out a way to get that information to the user. But you should still do this. This is good for SEO. This is good for saving your bookmark. This is good for sending out that URL in your social media post, all that kind of stuff. I have a screenshot of the title tag that says page turn in here. The next thing is consider focusing to your main. So if you're not using HTML5, start. You should. It's old. It's even the newest of the old. But consider going from one page to the next and focusing them to the main. Is it important for a user from, let's say, going to the home page to the About page to know about the entire navigation section again? If they want to get to it, you can bring them through landmarks or through other things, but intentionally, they're trying to get to the About Us page. They want to hear about us, right? So you can focus them to the main content, and you'll actually see that I'm doing that here with just a tab index of -1. So that means that normal keyboard users won't actually focus to it. It's only through JavaScript that you're doing it. Another one is use an ARIA label by your H1. If you're not using H1s, you're in big trouble. But ultimately, when you actually focus to that main, and you're referencing the H1, and you're using an ARIA labeled by, it actually, when you focus to it, you don't actually have to tell it anything else. It'll say that, hey, I'm on this special page about us, right? It's already built in through ARIA and so forth. So for big page turns, you want to consider using that as a technique as well. Consider using ARIA Live when the page is loading, right? We lose that feature. So if you have a slow loading page, if you're calling a large document, you might, while you're doing that little cute spinner, you might actually tell the user that the page is loading so they're not wondering what's happening. So ARIA Live is a great way to do that. And between focusing and ARIA Live, you'll get most of the big concerns taken care of. So I have here what's called an ARIA Live Polite at the bottom of the page. I actually use it as a utility. I'll just throw a whole bunch of stuff in there from time to time. I don't create new ones. You can do all sorts of different techniques and so forth. So I don't know how much time I have, probably a lot. but I want to demo 2 examples, and I'm going to get into that. So I'm going to first demo the bad, and hopefully, A, the sound works, and B, you can kind of see and hear, but I'll try and explain as much of this as possible. So first about the demo. So I built this little application in Backbone.js about 4 years ago, okay? Number 1. Number 2 is, at the time, I didn't consider anything accessible about it. Nothing. Like, didn't use ARIA, didn't even use H1 tags, didn't do anything. But I want to talk about why that's important. And then the purpose of this spot, just so you understand the context of it, it's like a Dropbox. So a photographer would go to this site, take a whole bunch of images, drop it in or choose their page, and they would prepare to do an upload for, for later use. So it's, if you've ever used a Dropbox, it's ultimately a file transfer system. Okay, so here goes. So the first thing that I'm going to demonstrate, nothing's moving yet, don't worry, is I'm going to walk you through the experience of what you're about to see, and you won't hear because this is just the mouse experience. So you're going to drag and drop or choose. I'm then going to review the upload details. I'm going to then likely review the attached file. So once I put something into that drop area, it's going to be attached. And then I'm going to want to delete a file on purpose, like I put a bad file in there. I want to remove it from my attachments. And then I'm going to review if anything like failed or not attached. And then I'm going to complete the upload. And once the upload is completed, I'm going to view one of my images that I upload. So let's see if this works. So you're going to see, unfortunately, what is just a mouse experience here. So I just uploaded 10 files. 1 didn't attach. I'm going to move my mouse to the delete button. To delete this file is what I called it. I click it, it's gone, great. I'm going to review the not attached files, and then I'm going to complete the upload, and now it's loading each file onto the server. And then I notice that some files are updated, ignore the mistakes at the bottom. And then I'm going to view a file of my son that I just uploaded. Yay. Okay, so that's the normal person experience, right? Okay, and I just wanted you all to get an idea of the not accessible app from a normal person's experience. And now we're going to demonstrate this from an accessibility point of view, which isn't actually accessible. So the first thing that we're going to do is keyboard users only. And it's going to be the same steps with some subtle nuances. So tabs choose the file. So I'm going to tab to the choose file system, which is a browser object. I'm going to hit enter to activate it. I'm going to select my images through the desktop system. I'm going to try and review the uploaded details. I'm going to review the attached files. I'm going to delete a file that doesn't belong. And I have this strike through because I actually won't be able to do it. It's impossible. And then I'm going to review the not attached files. And then I'm going to complete my upload. And I'm going to then try and view one of the images. Now, again, there's no audio for this. It's keyboard only users. So I might sprinkle in a little bit of voice here just so you see what's happening. So let's go to the next slide. So again, keyboard user on a non-accessible single page application. So I demonstrate that I'm tabbing to the browse. I see all my images. I select them all. They loaded. I'm going to tab to the delete button, which I actually can't do. And I get frustrated, so I move on. I'm going to complete my upload. And I'm going to try and tab backwards to view one of my photos, which I can't do. Okay. Class participation. The answer is in front of you on the right, so for those that can see it, why? Why can't I use this application from a keyboard perspective? Right in the front here, yep. Yeah, go ahead. In the brown. Yeah. Yeah, close. Correct. So what you have here is I have a picture of it. So I'm using an anchor, which is commonly known as an href, but I actually don't have the href attribute. And the href attribute is what binds all of the keyboard events to the object. So it's no href, or I'm not actually putting in extra keyboard handling. Anybody that's ever done Angular, I can guarantee you've done this before with all those fancy ng clicks, right? And here's the key takeaway. ng click, not ng keyboard, right? So unless you have a keyboard object that's native to it, you likely are causing more problems. Okay, next, I'm going to do this through a screen reader. Okay, so hopefully the sound, I'm not going to talk during it because I want you to hear it, but I'm going to talk right now what task I'm trying to accomplish. I basically broken up the same two demos into 3 sections. So the first one is called uploading files. So I'm going to scan the page using headers. I'm going to scan the page looking for form controls. So I would anticipate some sort of button, right, submit or complete, something like that. I'm going to activate the upload files. I'm going to select the files. I'm going to get confused and make some assumptions here. I'm telling you right now that there's a problem. I'm going to scan the page for new form controls because I'm confused. And then I'm going to jump to the upload details and get the upload details, hopefully. So let's see how this works out.
Form, no item, headings menu. Heading level 1, not accessible single page. Heading level 2, drag and drop files. Heading level 2, upload details. Heading level 2, attached files. Heading level 2, not attached files. Form controls menu. No files selected. File upload button. No files selected. File upload button. In dialog. 4. Window not accessible. Single page application. File transfer. Column view. Browser 0 items selected. 11 items selected. No files selected. File upload button.
So this is where I'm confused.
Form controls menu. No files selected. File. Cancel button. Complete upload button. No items in. Web spots. Headings menu. Heading level 1. Not accept. Heading level 2. Drag and drop files. Heading level 2. Upload details. Heading level 2. Upload detail. List 3 items. Bullet combined file size. 704,933,868.
That's in
1 of
place.
3. Bullet files attached. 10. 2 of 3. Bullet files not attached. 1. 3 of 3. End of list.
Okay, so here's what happened. I'll re-articulate that. So I used the standard browser object to upload files. I got 11 of them in there, right? Once I activated to upload, it told me nothing except for no files attached because I went to the original button that had nothing attached to it. So then I got confused. I was like, wait, something must have happened. So I rescanned with the headers, and I noticed that there are new headers, and I rescanned looking for different buttons, right? So I would expect, because there weren't any buttons before, that I would get a cancel, which I did, and I got an upload complete, which I did, okay? But I was also looking for a delete or a remove button because one of the anticipated actions is to remove those bad files, which I didn't get. So ultimately, the same problem that we just talked about with the href missing, it prevents you from actually getting that information to a screen reader also, okay? So all I've done right now is just the first step. I've actually attached 10 successful files, and now I want to go to the next step, okay? So the next step, which I just told you what went wrong. So in this particular case, there's no focus management. So after I uploaded a file using the browser object, I probably should have gone somewhere or been told something. So that's the no focus, right? I opened it, closed it, I was back at what I began, didn't know what happened. So these are the things that you want to keep in mind, and we'll see this actually in a couple more demos here. So the next thing I want you to see is I'm going to try and delete the file, right? So I know that I've added a bad file because it said file not attached 1, or I know that I've probably uploaded something, but I'm going to go and try and search for this. So I'm going to jump ahead to the attached files area. I'm going to try and advance to delete this file. That's what it's called. It's a TIFF, by the way. And then find the remove button. And I'm going to be confused because I can't actually remove it. So here we go.
Heading level 2. Attached file. Delete this file TIFF.
That's the file.
72 megabytes. X. Clickable. DSC _X. Clickable.
Okay,
DSC underscore X.
okay.
Clickable. DSC underscore 0374 TIFF. 72 megabytes. Clickable.
So what you can't see here because VoiceOver and my screen recorder doesn't capture it is me hitting the enter key every time I'm on that X clickable, which I don't know if you've never seen this before or ever been to it. Would anybody know what X clickable means? I wouldn't. And the fact that I can't actually click it because I'm not using a mouse is no good either, right? So again, same problem, href, also bad communication. Like visually, I like the idea of this red box with an X in it to represent a delete can or something like that. But the information communicated to me is really bad. So like what went wrong? It's basically there's no good label on the button and there's no keyboard events because I'm not either using a browser object, and since I'm using a custom one, I'm not binding anything to the keyboard. Can't use it. It's completely inaccessible. Okay, let's go one step further. So screen reader experience again. So I want to finalize my upload. So I've got something like 10 files uploaded. I can't find the delete file. I'm getting a little frustrated, a little irritated. And now I want to actually just be done with it. I'm going to upload the files. I know that there's a button that does that. So I jump to the not attached files. I advance to the complete upload button. I activate the complete upload using my keyboard. I'm confused again. I'm waiting for a few seconds. I have no idea why. And then I scan the page for new headers because I've become so frustrated. And then I finally advance to the uploaded complete section and try and figure things out. So here we go.
Heading level 2. Heading level 2. Not that file type doc. 72 megabytes. The file type is wrong. Cancel button. Complete upload button.
So I've just hit the enter key, but you don't know that if you can't see it. Now I'm waiting. Still don't know what happened.
But heading level 2. Not attached files. Heading level 2. Upload completed. Heading level 2. List 3 items. Bullet files upload 10. One of.
So again, confusion. Like I never got communicated, all that kind of stuff. So if I do what went wrong again, it's the same principles, right? Same thing. In my application, there's 3 main tracks. It's upload files, delete file, and then finalize all my files. And I can't do any of that because I'm using the same logic and the same code for each of those. Again, it's no communication, so no ARIA Live, no good labels, and definitely no focus management, right? So now let's demo the better one. And I put a little asterisk here because frankly, I made this better in the last couple of nights. So again, this was not intentionally built accessible. It was 4 years old, and I was like, instead of looking at other people's sites and demoing that, I wanted to show you in a few nights worth of work how much can change if you just kind of stick to these key principles. And I have a really nice picture of the sun coming over the Earth from NASA. It's pretty fantastic. So let's go through the keyboard user experience first. Okay, so you won't hear anything, but I'm going to walk through the same steps. So tab to choose a file, hit enter to activate it, select the images, review the upload details, review the attached files, delete a file that doesn't belong, review the not attached files, complete upload, and then view one image. Okay, there's no magic to this, so let's just check it out. And you won't hear anything, but I'll kind of interject every so often here. So I'm uploading the file. I see the dialog from the operating system. I select all my files. I automatically focus the upload details when it's finished. I now can actually focus on all those fancy little red delete buttons or remove buttons. Okay, and I can get to them. And I actually deleted one, so I'm moving on beyond them. I get eventually to the complete upload. I push it. I now see the waiting or the files being uploaded. And now I actually see more buttons that actually look like buttons and the disable buttons. And now I see a picture of my son again. So from a keyboard perspective, mission accomplished. Okay, so what worked? Focus management, keyboard events. There's no magic to it. It's dot focus in pretty much every framework. And the keyboard events, if you're just using buttons or links or standard browser objects, you're good as gold. There's no magic to it at all. So let's do the screen reader experience. The same thing, I broke it up into 3 like tasks. So again, uploading files. Scan the page by headers, scan for form controls, activate the upload, select my files. I am confused and assumed. I've got that striked out because I'm no longer confused, and I do not have to assume. I've also no longer have to scan the page for new form controls because it's going to show or tell me something, both through all the assistive technology. Oh, clearly the lights are going off for those that can't tell. And then I'm going to jump to the upload details. I don't need to do that because it does it for me, and then I'm going to get the upload details. Anyway, I'm not going to be distracted by the lights. So here we go. So we are going to hear some sound. We're going to see some images, voiceover again on the Mac. So let's see how this works out.
Headings menu. Heading level 1, updated single page application. Heading level 2, drag and drop files. Heading level 2, upload details. Heading level 2, attached files. Heading level 2, not attached files. Form controls menu. No files selected. File upload button. No files selected. File upload button. No files selected. File upload button. In dialog. 4. Window, single page application. File transfer, column view, browser 0 items selected. 11 items selected. Upload details, group. Heading level 2, upload details, list 3 items. Bullet combined file size, 704,933,868. 1 of 3.
Files.
Bullet files attached, 10. 2 of 3. Bullet files not attached, 1. 3 of 3. End of list. End.
Okay, so there are a couple of things to take away from that. One, if you saw it, if you perceived it, the minute I activated the file upload, it automatically went me to upload details. So that's the focus management, right? Okay. The other thing that you may actually notice too is you hear all those cues from the screen reader because something else is happening. Whereas before, nothing was happening. So you never heard the click or anything speaking automatically. So there was no magic behind this. It was just literally using dot, focus, and the parentheses in Backbone or jQuery. I can't remember what I did then. But ultimately, like, it's so simple to just tell the user what you need to do next, where to go next, and they'll generally listen or perceive it in their own time and do it, and they will be a lot less confused. So let's go to the next step. So the next step is deleting a file. So we've uploaded 10 files. I'm going to jump to the attached files. I'm going to advance to delete this file. That's what it's called again. I'm going to try and find the remove button for that file. I'm not going to be confused. I'm going to activate the delete button, which I should call remove because that's what it says. So note that. And then I'm going to notice that my file was deleted somehow. Right? Here we go.
Attached files, group. Heading level 2, attached files. Delete this file TIFF. 72 megabytes. Remove delete this file TIFF button. Remove DFC underscore 0374 TIFF button. File delete this file TIFF has been removed.
Okay, so
Attached files, group.
okay, there is a mistake in this, and I did that on purpose. Okay, so I'm going to do it one more time. I want to see if people notice that. Let me play it again. Oh.
Attached files.
So we're doing it again.
Heading level 2, attached files. Delete this file TIFF. 72 megabytes. Remove delete this file TIFF
This is the
button.
button. I just
Remove
clicked
DSC
it.
underscore 0374 TIFF button. File delete this file TIFF has been removed.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about that for a minute. Does anybody want to try and volunteer and point out what went wrong? The gentleman with the Chicago shirt.
Did it read the next file down?
Yes, great. Okay, so SPA, everything loads in through JavaScript asynchronously. If your events are happening faster than your response is happening, you likely have some timing issues. So in this case, my focus management went ahead of my communication that the file had actually been removed. So it's important to note that you might actually have been doing the right things, but you have to pay close attention to the nuances of timing in particular, especially if you're paying with payloads of content or things coming in. So I don't have that written down here, but ultimately, oh, I do have it written down. Forgot my own slide. So obviously what worked is focus management. I did that. I went to the next thing, like that Gmail example I gave. I had keyboard events. I was actually able to do it. And then I actually told the user that the file had been removed. But the timing was a little off, right? So you have to pay close attention to your asynchronous as well, okay? So the last part, again, is the finalizing upload. This is the fun part, right? I've gone through all this work. Now I want the fruits of my labor of actually getting to my files. So I'm going to jump to the not attached files, advance to the complete upload button. I'm going to activate the complete upload button. I'm not going to be confused again like I was before. I'm not going to need to worry about waiting. I'm not going to need to scan the page for new headers. And I'm going to get the upload complete details. And then I'm going to confirm or view one of my images. So let's listen to this and see this again.
Not attached files. Group. Heading level 2. Not attached files. That file type doc. 72 megabytes. The file type is wrong. End of not attached files. Group. Cancel button. Complete upload button. Uploading files. Upload completed. Group. Upload completed. Heading level 2. Upload completed. List 3 items. Bullet files uploaded. 9. 1 of 3. Bullet errors. 0. 2 of 3. Bullet upload time. 3.898 seconds. 3 of 3. End of list. Upload new button. Upload with same data button.
Now I'm going to go look for
Form
my files.
controls menu. No files selected. File upload button. Done/view DSC_0374 TF button. Done/view DSC_0375 TF button. Done/view DSC_0376 TF button. Done/view DSC_0376 TF button. Webcon
And
90%
again,
loaded.
I see a picture of my son.
DSC_0376 TF image.
So ultimately, what did we do here? This should be like, you know, a broken record here. Focus management. After I did an action, I told the user where to go next, or I'm ultimately suggesting them to do. I'm using keyboard events through browser objects. I'm not doing anything fancy. Okay, you can, but you have to then bind those events. And then I'm telling the user what happened. It said that I was waiting or uploading, and then when it was completed, I told it was completed. And then in the last portion where it said done view all the files, I actually told the user all of those green buttons that this is particular to each image. So I knew that I have new things on the page because there's a lot more, and I can go and view them. So ultimately, let's just review this just from the basics is ensure that you have best practice HTML. The HTML is super critical here. Like if you have bad HTML, you have a bad everything. Okay, use native event-based objects or keyboard events. So a button should be a button, a link should be a link, a form control should be a form control. You know, avoid those spans with special events on it and things like that. Okay, your ARIA needs to match the specs. I cannot emphasize this enough. And the beauty of this is for anybody that thinks like creating an accessible, rich application is difficult, the W3C writes all of the code for you. It's in the WAI. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can create your own, but use their templates or their guidelines to actually influence how you should do it. And they actually tell you all the success criteria. So should it be this? Should it be that? Like that's super critical. A focus management, that is absolutely necessary. And then I recommend using an ARIA Live communication utility. So like for those, you know, developers in the room, write one component for ARIA Live and just inject the data that you want to communicate into it. There's no reason to have 15 of them, right? Some sites have a couple, but mostly you can use one utility. And then when making big changes to the document, consider all of the above. Like literally, without those first couple of bullet points, your application will not be accessible, even if it isn't a spot, you need these things. So I truly believe this. Like I am developer heart, accessible minded, but I'm also UX like thought provoked, right? This is truly a team effort. You cannot make a spa accessible unless you are working with the developers, if you're working with the user experience, if you have done some form of usability research or testing. The things that you just learned in this presentation might not work for you. Like you have to test and research and analyze how the experience is. And then for the QA people in, you gotta use the screen readers and things like that to test this, because there's no way you could do this and know all this information unless you were hearing and seeing and reacting to all the things yourself. So if you're a developer, use a screen reader. If you're a QA person, use a screen reader. You gotta know this stuff. And there's a whole lot more that I probably didn't write here. And I have a picture of Star Trek, the original series here. And don't be the red jersey guy, because he's the guy that always dies, right? In the episode. So work as a team, okay? So I don't remember who said this, so I put unknown, but I've been saying it for a couple of years. But I really want you to walk away with this quote. There's a difference between a disability and the things we build being disabling. My first application was built in the eyes of just normal users, and it's completely disabling. No one other than able-bodied people, frankly, a lot of people might be confused with it anyway, can use it. You have to think with everyone in mind, not disabilities, everyone in mind. It's really, really important. So make sure that you do that with your applications. And then now is a good time to, say thank you for coming and thank you for letting me host. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to do my best to answer them for you.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll get time.
Okay.
So Ken will have a mic for anyone who raised their hand for question.
In the green shirt, second row right here.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. You have the mic. I get it. I'm not following along. Now I am. Go ahead.
Great presentation, by
Thank
the
you.
way. I had a question. So you were talking about focus management, and in the examples you gave, after you triggered an event, I saw that the focus went to a different area of the page. I think part of this has to do with the manual user testing, but I'm just wondering if there's any instances where moving a user to different areas of the page versus announcing it could be a little bit disorienting.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. So the question is when doing focus management, can you actually create a disoriented experience? Okay, the answer is yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to work with UX. And I'll give you a classic case that happens all the time. So let's take my main example, right? So I recommend basically focusing to the main on a new page load, right? If your header, generally in a header tag, your navigation, is let's say 25 pixels high, small, you're likely not going to notice a focus change because the user won't be scrolled down at all because you're likely at the very top of the page. But now let's flip that around. Let's say that your header is like 300 pixels. Focus management brings the top of the element that you're focusing to the top of the browser. So if you're going from page to page, you're likely hiding visual content. So it doesn't really impact the accessibility of it, but it sure impacts the experience for normal users. So yes. So there are times where you might opt not to do focus management, and you may do more communication, right? Like something happened. And that's why it's really important to go through this experience with your user experience partners and also know it for yourself, because if you're perceiving something janky is what I would call it, but it's accessible, we don't want to make this for not everyone, right? We want to make it for everyone. And we want the best experience possible. But the answer is absolutely yes. You could actually make a worse experience by doing things like focus management if they're not done carefully and correctly. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. So the question is, in the example you were giving about for example, when the response comes in terms of
Yeah, the timing.
the timing issue, yeah. How do you address that?
Okay, so in my experience, so it's been oh, sorry, here's the question. So the question is how do I address the timing issue of asynchronous calls and responses being communicated to the experience, right? Good, okay. Without getting too super technical, there's a bunch of right ways and there's a bunch of maybe not so right ways. The easiest way is you can perceive the load time of what it is that's happening and use something like a set timeout, right? Not best practice, but you could use like a promise, right? So for those of you that don't know what a promise is, it's basically a JavaScript terminology that says that I'm anticipating something coming back, and when it comes back, tell me, and I promise to wait until you tell me, right? So ultimately, you can fire the focus or the communication once the promise, finishes. That's generally the best way to do it. And there's also like queuing things up, because you can use like things like ARIA Live, and depending upon your attribute that you're using, you can have it actually like queue up so it doesn't interrupt and it waits till the end. There's a variety of things, but you have to pay close attention to timing for sure. But promises are usually the best way to do it, is in my experience. Good question. Anybody else? Oh, a couple more.
Well, thanks for the presentation. It's really eye-opening for me and really mind-opening as well. The question I have, I'm not sure if there's an easy answer, but I'll ask anyways. The focus thing that you talked about, where improving it from an accessibility standpoint can actually worsen the experience, is something that I've thought about, and the ableist bias toward in applications that I have a sensitivity for, and I don't know if there's an answer. And here's an example. There's well-known research that humans read text in the order, in the size of the text. So you will read the largest font first, and then the smaller, regardless of the order. So for example, if you were to click on that slide, your other things on top of thank you, we would probably still read the thank you first, because it just happens to be the biggest.
Got it.
I don't know if you have an example for that. But the point I'm making is, if there's screen reader without a lot of effort, I guess you could change the tab order so the tab order followed the size of the text. But things like that, right? Somebody might have designed an eye-catching ad or something with big text and the smaller text above it with the sole intent of eye-catching, and thereby reducing the accessibility for people who have different needs, who are differently able. And I'm not even sure if there's a good answer to that, but if you have tips on how to make the marketing needs or whatever the needs are in presenting that text precisely, so not really creating a disabling app to use your terminology.
Okay, let me try and repeat that. Please let me know if I do a good job of this. So like, how do you balance marketing, brand, and typography, the visual design, and still compel the user from those techniques that graphic designers and designers want you to be compelled by, and also still be accessible, right? Okay. First, just because I heard Ray say it, don't change the tab order. Do not. That's a big no-no, okay? Instead, you have to kind of think about the motive, right? And I haven't really thought this answer out, so bear with me here, but like, graphic designers generally have a rationale or reason on why they do the things that they do. So let's just take this thank you here, right? Okay, so clearly in this example, I want you to take away 3 things in this visual hierarchy. Thank you, number 1, it's the biggest, it's the boldest, and it's got space between it, right? Number 2, my name and all my fancy certifications, which I'm now proud of, thank you. But also then following that, my email and my Twitter and the slides, those come tertiary to all the rest. So I did that for a reason, right? Why would your reason for focusing them in a different order ever happen? If the motive should be the same, right? Why would you want to tell a user to go check this out, and I'm not using the word see for a reason, know about this thing, if it doesn't have the same visual hierarchy, or if it doesn't have the same compelling rationale from the visual design, right? So that's why we use H tags, right? H1 is a higher priority, and H6 is a lower priority. I mean, I've seen designers use smaller typography for H1s than H2s. Not really the best practice, but again, if you think about it, if you can't see it, but you can still perceive the value of that attribute, H1 is bigger or more important than H2, is it so important that visual folks go through a subtly different experience? As long as it's still behind the same motive that you want them to get this information first, like could I have made the thank you a little bit smaller than my name? I mean, yes, the answer is yes, but I personally want to thank you guys more importantly than to tell you what my name is. So why would I send you all, let's say with the screen reader or tab index, to my name first? That's not my motive. That's why user research and usability research and testing is so important, because designers don't design in a bubble, right? They generally get influenced by the business, the brand, and UX, and all sorts of different people first. And then they design to those needs. So we should be developing against those same criteria. So we don't want, like, let's say something visually compelling to be last in the list. And that comes into play of how you develop your DOM order and all sorts of different things. So hopefully that answered your question. And again, don't change the tab index.
My eyes don't do that. My eyes don't always do that anyway. My eyes sometimes, like, I noticed that I went for his name and I went for his email address. I ignored thank you. I didn't even see it. I mean, I knew it was there, but I like went over it because I was looking for information. And I don't know if that relates or not, but like I have a tendency to avoid the big text and to look for information and details on the page in general. I don't know if that jives with anyone else in the room who actually knows more about UX than I do.
Yeah, so she's pointing out that in her particular case, that thank you was more or less skimmed over, and the predominant way of perceiving this slide was directly to my name or the information. And while that wasn't my motive, if that is the case, we would discover that during usability testing. And then we may actually decide to, if that's the case, let's change the visual design and also change the code behind the scenes to downplay the thank you if more people are interested in my name, which I appreciate that, but it's really about the thank you. Okay. Another question here.
All right, so this question isn't fully thought out, but when you are creating like a component library for a framework and you're working with the designers and you're deciding how many, when you're trying to figure out where to put the heading tags so that when you have a page that's filled with these components that you have the correct H1s, H2, H3 on the page, because there's a chance with the components that you build that a particular view never has an H1.
Okay, so the question is, and I'm going to change it a little bit. So mostly in molecular design of components and having a component library where you get to pick where things go, headings are a critical aspect of both visual contents and also accessible contents. How do you ensure the right heading is used in the right order in the context of the page if you don't actually know what the whole page is and all you're doing is doing components? Great question. Great conundrum too. Actually recently, I don't know how recent, but in HTML5 there was a rule change with headings, right? So first of all, in the old days, and this is dating myself, you were supposed to only have one H1 on the page. That is no longer the case. The W3C states that you should be in sequential order as best as possible and have it make sense. So if you're actually thinking about dropping a component that has a fixed value for the heading, you likely should go back to your strategy review and see, like, does it have to be fixed? Can the authors actually choose in the context of where they're dropping the components, or can the system itself understand what's on the page and then change it? So here's an example, AEM, right? Or Sitecore, all those CMS patterns. You can have a component with just a header and a paragraph. And that header allows the author, or the author is allowed to choose from 1 through 6. and we use governance to allow them to make a conscious decision according to the specs. That's a great way of doing it. It's also a risky way of doing it because then you're relying on governance, which is generally easily breakable, right? That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is you have actually the system do it for you. So let's say you have this header component with a paragraph of text, and they drop it on a page, and they put it between two other components. And the first component is an H1, and the second component is an H2. Maybe the dialogue, which is what it's called in AM, I can't remember what it's called in Sitecore or WordPress or whatever, says, hey, there's an H1 on the page, you've put it right below it. Do you want it to be a 2, a 3, or a 4, but you can't do 1? Like your business logic and your content strategy can be baked into the system. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a lot of work, okay? It's doable, it can be done, but generally speaking, people gravitate towards governance just because there's a lot less technology and there's a lot less work that you have to do if you want to make changes. So in our particular case, that what we do is we allow the content folks to choose based upon what they're doing on the page. And yes, you're right. They will likely choose the wrong one from time to time. But the beauty of a CMS in that particular, or in most cases when you're using, a code library or a design standard, like you can actually change it pretty quickly, or you can allow the user to manipulate it. So governance is generally the rule of thumb, but you can bake that into the code. It's just a little bit more difficult. The key takeaway here is that as long as it makes sense, like let's say your page has one H1 and 4 H2s. Who is to tell that those H2s aren't the same level or priority? Now, if they're visually different, that's a whole different story. But if you're trying to tell a story that I want everybody to know that this is the most important thing, H1, and then there are 3 other things that are less important, H2, H3, H4, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. But if you're talking about like a newspaper website, you're probably going to want to have a little bit more strategy into it. Or if you're talking about a pure marketing content management site, talking about a little bit more strategy into it. If you're talking about more of an application, it's generally like there are going to be specific places where you put things and they're not really going to change. So hopefully that answers your question.
Two more questions.
That's all the time we have for
Oh,
questions.
2 more questions.
Oh.
I was just told by the time master.
Oh, 2 more questions? Okay.
I'll make them quick. I promise. Or 1 more at least.
Thank you for the presentation. So I have a question. So I come from a UX background, and I know there are developers in the room. So I was actually wondering your thought behind us as UX professional trying to convince developers to build for accessibility, especially since, say, the majority of the user base they don't need such accommodations. So I was just wondering what your thought would be on that and how we should go around it.
Okay, so I'm going to rephrase that question a little bit more towards this audience. So the question was, as a UX developer, how do you convince developers to do this, right? Okay. Who's heard of user acceptance criteria?
Yep.
Everybody should raise their hand, or requirements is another word for it. Who's heard of requirements? Perfect. Where do the requirements generally start? The business. If the business wants it, or if they need it, or if they think they should have it, or if they just want to compel everybody to have goodwill, it starts at the business, which means that before the UX does any work, they need to be adhering to the business, right? So a classic example is there's tons of organizations finally starting to get on the bandwagon that say, we need to be WCAG level A something or other, or double A, who knows? That is a requirement. And all of the people in this room that if you're planning on even remotely going to an accessible, route, you need to know what those requirements are. So for the UXers in the room, I believe the biggest burden is on you guys. Because the developers generally just read the acceptance criteria and code. But you guys are the ones that are in charge of creating an experience for everyone. That's the key, not demographics. Not marketing, not your business folks. They want things out for the public. You need to learn and read and research about what's the best experience so you're meeting those business requirements. So I believe UX has the biggest burden, and there's really no convincing to developers. They just do what you're told, right? I mean, generally, I'm a developer. I don't always do what I'm told. But if you say you want it to be a button, we make it a button. If you say you want it to be a toggle, we make it a toggle. We don't make those decisions. The UX team makes those decisions, right? Or are informing those decisions. But that's a really good question. And it's definitely a challenge every day. It's always a challenge. One more according to the Time Master. Okay, one more, sweet.
I have a very in the weeds question, so let me know if I just need to pull you aside later. But what's the difference between ARIA Live and ARIA Busy?
Oh, okay, so I'm gonna try this quick, and I'm gonna probably be 50% wrong. So let's just go read the specs afterwards to be sure. But ARIA Live is after communicating for the screen reader's current speech. So if it's reading something out loud and you bring something into ARIA Live, it will wait likely until it's finished reading everything else. ARIA Busy breaks the application from reading and stops and basically says it's busy. I think it's the perceived of like page loading, but I'm not sure every browser or screen reader uses it or works with it. But Ray, I think
very rarely see ARIA Busy
Right.
used. ARIA Live is used quite a
yeah.
bit.
So the difference between busy and live is I think busy is we're stopping you until it's finished, and live is an unlimited possibility of communication. Yeah, but don't quote me on that. But it's being recorded. All right, well, thank you very much. I'm gonna stick around for a little bit, so if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know.
Thank you. And we'll be cutting off at 8, so we have enough half an hour to get the food.